Let's call this the Cliff Notes version of where college athletics seems to be headed. Okay. Now, you've probably heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've probably heard of this house settlement. Have you heard the term house settlement?
I have heard the term house settlement quite a bit recently, yes.
So regardless of how much you know about what it is, why it's in place, when it's going to get approved, who's going to approve it, what state all of this is happening in, you've probably heard house settlement, even if you don't know the details. And you don't need to know all the details. It'll bore you to pieces. But the gist of it is that there is going to be a settlement approved by a judge in California soon. Could theoretically be any day, but I think it's safe to say most expect it to be, quote, soon. So soon that the effects of it are expected to go into place July 1st, 2025. And the main thing you need to know about this house settlement is that it's going to do two big things. It is going to create what amounts to revenue sharing in college athletics, but with a very specific and defined salary cap on how much universities are allowed to spend. And it is also going to create what amounts to a panel that will approve or void NIL deals, the ones that have dominated the conversation in recent years. What that means is roughly $20 million is going to be set aside by athletic departments, universities, to be spent on student athletes annually. Mm-hmm. This is not coming from FedEx. This is not coming from Nike. This is not coming from Bank of Bartlett. This is coming from, for our purposes, the University of Memphis or the University of Mississippi or Mississippi State University or the University of Tennessee or the University of Arkansas. All of these schools will more or less be allowed to pay roughly $20 million annually to student athletes. And it is very much pay for play. We want you to come to our university and play this sport or that sport. Here's how much money we are willing to offer you. On the NIL side of things, there will suddenly be, as I noted, a panel that will look at every deal that any university under this umbrella submits. And they will say this is okay or this is not okay. Mm-hmm. So before PJ Haggerty could actually have a legitimate approved contract with the University of Memphis or anybody else, this panel would look at the contract and they would say, yeah, this looks legitimate, or no, come on, this is not legitimate. We're not going to allow this one. And so there was an interesting bit of news that came out of ACC meetings last week. I believe we talked about it. But they had a expert come in to try to discuss with ACC athletic directors and coaches and other people who need to be educated on this stuff, exactly how it's going to work. And this person told people working with the ACC that roughly 70 to 80% of the deals that have been in place in college athletics, NIL deals from collectives, the PJ Haggerty deal, if you will, about 70, 80% of those would be void once this goes into effect. They would be deemed illegitimate because here's the truth. Chris Vernon and PJ Haggerty. Chris Vernon has a bigger social media following and a more marketable name in this market than PJ Haggerty. He just does. All right?
I think it's true, yep.
Okay. But would anybody give Chris Vernon $4 million, $3 million to just endorse things?
Probably not.
Probably not, right? I hope so, but probably not, right? Because they would deem that, that's just not the way it works. You do that for LeBron James, not Chris Vernon, right? So here's the truth. If any of this was legitimate, if you were trying to make an impact in the Memphis market, with a celebrity, it'd probably be money better spent on Chris Vernon than PJ Haggerty. Certainly before last year. Maybe after an All-American season, we're having a different conversation.
Sure.
But you get the point. Here's my point. None of these deals, or very few of these deals that have been created to lure student athletes to campuses all over this country, whether it's Memphis, St. John's, Texas Tech, anybody else, they're not legitimate marketing deals. They're not legitimate NIL deals. They are people wealthy people throwing lots of money at football players and basketball players to get them to play football and basketball. That's all it is.
Okay.
Once this House settlement goes into place, there will be a committee put into place that looks at all these deals and they say, that's not legitimate. Void. What all of this is intended to do is to create a more balanced playing field and create what amounts to a real salary cap so that we're not living in the world that we're living in now, where if you are St. John's, or BYU is a great example of this. If you decide you want to spend $20 million on a basketball team, you just can. And it doesn't matter if other schools can't do it. If you decide you can and want to, you can. And that's how BYU is ending up with 5-star transfers and 5-star high school prospects and maybe the number 1 pick in the 2026 NBA draft. They're just throwing money at it. What BYU is doing right now, honestly, what St. John's is doing right now, what Memphis is trying to do with PJ Haggerty right now would not be allowed once this House settlement goes through.
Okay.
So that's where we're headed. That's where we're at. Interesting bit of news last night from Ross Dellinger, Yahoo Sports. What he reported is that Governor Lee here in the state of Tennessee signed a state bill earlier this month that more or less, and again, I'm trying to keep this simple for the sake of the conversation, says that universities in the state of Tennessee do not have to adhere to these new rules.
Okay.
All right? We're going to create a law that says we don't have to follow your rules. So when this new commission is put into place, it's the CSC. That's a term you'll hear all the time, CSC. When this new CSC commission is put into place, and they say you can only spend X amount of dollars of your own money on student athletes, and NIL deals have to be legitimate. We can't have PJ Haggerty having an NIL deal that is more lucrative than the type of NIL deal John Morant would get from the same company. Because this really is what's happening. If John Morant, this is actually a better example. If John Morant wanted to do a marketing deal with Bank of Bartlett or anybody, it probably would not be as lucrative as the marketing deal PJ Haggerty's about to sign. Because the only reason you're really giving PJ Haggerty this kind of money in a marketing deal, NIL deal, is to get him to play basketball. It's not to get him to bring attention or endorse any specific thing. It's to get him to play basketball.
Right.
So this commission would sign off on all these deals and look at all these things. What this state law that Governor Lee has signed is intended to do is just say, no, we can do whatever we want to do. If Tennessee wants to give a quarterback $8 million from a collective, from 2 boosters over here, they're allowed to do that, regardless of what your rules say. And if Memphis wants to give a point guard $5 million to play basketball, Memphis is allowed to do that, regardless of what your rules say. Our law trumps your rules. Also last night, Ross Dellinger reports that now, to combat this type of thing, the 4 power conferences, SEC, Big Ten, ACC, Big 12, are circulating a document right now, basically forcing or trying to force all of its member institutions and perhaps other institutions like Memphis to sign it, that more or less says, you ready for this? Your state laws cannot trump our rules. So follow me here if you can. The NCAA and the CSC, this new version of everything, is creating rules. And then states are creating laws to trump the rules. And now universities, conferences, are trying to create new documents that basically say you can't challenge us in any way, and your state laws don't go into effect. And you'll never believe what legal analysts are saying about all this. It doesn't matter what they do. Everybody's getting sued. It does not matter what they're about to do. Everybody will get sued. You can go this way or this way, and the end game will be you're back in a court. So, this is exactly what we've been talking about for a long time. Unless you do it the right way, you're always going to run into legal issues. And before we can even approve this settlement that is supposed to bring real change to college athletics, we're already running into multiple legal issues. Like the same man, Ross Dellinger, who was reporting all of this stuff, is quoting multiple legal analysts saying, I don't even know if any of this is enforceable. I don't even know if any of this is legal. Keep in mind, the only reason we're here to begin with is because the previous rules were illegal. Every time they were challenged, or at least most times they were challenged, the judges sided with the plaintiff,
athletes.
Not the defendant.
Yeah.
With the college athlete, not the NCAA. So the only reason you ended up in this place is because you were creating rules that were illegal. And what legal analysts are now telling us is that this next set of, for lack of a better word, rules is also probably going to be deemed illegal, or at the very least be legally challenged. And here's where you're going to run into a real mess. And I can't wait for this one, because this is the crux of the whole thing that shows you the people in the room taking college athletics down this path don't have a proper grasp for reality when it comes to college athletics. Because here's what they're trying to do. I don't think they're going to be successful, but here's what they're trying to do. If everybody else would just get out of their way, including the governor of Tennessee, here's what they want to do. Create a world where only legitimate marketing deals are allowed for college athletes. So in reality, PJ Haggerty would not get $3 million in NIL because that's not legitimate. You know what he would get? $20,000 to show up at Gibson's Donuts or whatever.
Gotcha.
All right? That's really what his name, image, and likeness is probably worth. $20,000 here, $15,000 there, $5,000 to show up somewhere over here. That's probably what it's actually worth, if that. All right? So what they want to do is say, we'll allow you to take fair market value, but not this absurd amount of money that's just disguised as pay for play. And the real money college athletes will make, it's going to be over here from this revenue sharing. This roughly $20 million that we're going to allow the University of Tennessee to give to anybody it wants, the University of Memphis to give to anybody it wants. The problem they're going to run into, and I'm not telling you any secret here, everybody understands this. I just don't know why they're not trying to figure it out in any sort of effective way in advance of us getting to the exact place I'm about to tell you we're going to go. The problem with this $20 million number is that not all schools that are going to be expected to adhere to these rules have the same number of sports that they care about. So you've probably heard people talk about this before, but if not, this is where we're headed. There is a very realistic scenario if these rules are put into place the way they are intended to be put into place, where athletic directors all over the country have to make decisions about how this money is going to be spent. The Duke athletic director talked about this recently. She said, I have had long conversations with my men's basketball coach, my women's basketball coach, and my football coach, because these are the three sports that matter most on most campuses. And she said, I've asked all of them, what do you need in terms of this money to run the type of program you need to run to be successful? And I just asked them all for a number. I'm paraphrasing here, but this is basically it. And she said, I got everybody's number. And if you add those numbers up, we don't have enough money for that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
You know what it's similar to?
Oh, I bet like one program wanted the whole budget.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
You know what it's very similar to?
Yeah.
The state of Tennessee gives Memphis hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on facilities and stadiums and arenas and whatever.
Yep.
And so you ask the Grizzlies, hey, what do you need? And they say, well, this is what we need. And then you ask the University of Memphis, hey, what do you need for Simmons Bank? And they say, well, this is what we need. And then you ask 901 FC, hey, what do you need for a soccer stadium? And they say, well, this is what we need.
Yeah.
And then you ask the Redbirds, hey, what do you need for AutoZone Park? And they say, this is what we need. And then you add up all those numbers and you go, oh, God, this doesn't work.
We don't have it yet.
We don't have that much money. So you have to make hard decisions. So at places like Duke, they got to make hard decisions. Places like Alabama, they got to make hard decisions. Places like the University of Memphis, you got to make hard decisions. You either got to, I promise you, Ed Scott looks at Ryan Silverfield. He looks at Penny Hardaway. He says, what do you need and what do you need? They both tell him numbers, and he goes, oh, we don't have that. So now what do you do, right? So these decisions have to be made all over the country. I don't have to tell you, but in most SEC institutions,
that's what I was just going to bring
Big
up.
Ten institutions, they care deeply about football. So I'm just going to make up some numbers here, but you'll get the point when I'm done. At a place like Alabama, you got roughly $20 million in this revenue sharing pool of money. Well, how much you got to spend on football? I don't know the number exactly, but it could be 9, it could be 11, it could be 13. Each school will figure this out. But the schools like Alabama and Clemson and Texas, and they're going to lean heavily in that direction. Ohio State, heavily in that direction. So for the sake of the conversation, let's say that at a place like Alabama, they say, okay, we got roughly $20 million. 10 of it's going to be set aside for football. Might be more. But let's, for the sake of this conversation, let's call it 10. 10 is going to be set aside for football. 6 is going to be set aside for men's basketball, and 4 is going to be set aside for everything else. Women's basketball, baseball, soccer, whatever, however you want to do it. These are just, those numbers won't be right. They won't be the same at each school, but for the sake of this conversation, let's just say that's the number. $10 million for football, $6 million for men's basketball, $4 million for everything else. That's what Alabama decides to do. Clemson says we'll do 11 for football, 5 for basketball, and 4 for everything else. Ohio State says we're doing 13 for football, 4 for basketball, men's basketball, and 3 for everything else. You do it however you want, but you got to chop up this pie, all right? But what are they doing at St. John's? They ain't got to spend 10 on football.
It's all basketball.
It can be if they want it to be. So here's the scenario. If everybody plays by the rules as they're intended to be put into place, here's a scenario that happens later this year. John Calipari is at Arkansas, and he's in a recruiting battle in the transfer portal for the best point guard in America. And his main competition is St. John's. And John's got a pot of money, but the pot's much smaller than the St. John's pot of money. And you ready for this? In theory, smaller than Villanova's pot, smaller than Creighton's pot, smaller than any school that cares about basketball that doesn't have to spend this type of money on football, Marquette. All right? So what this new system is putting into place is a situation where if you play by the rules, as the rules are intended, John Calipari will have to tell a transfer, the number one transfer in America, this is all we've got to give you to come play at Arkansas. While Rick Pitino is saying we can double that legally. These are the rules that are going to be put into place. Now, let me ask you a question. You've been following college athletics for a long time. Do you think there's any scenario where an SEC school or a Big Ten school or a Big 12 school is going to be in a recruiting competition with a Big East school? Or are you ready for this? Maybe even an A-10 school, because Dayton might have more money to spend on basketball players than Kentucky, than Florida. Do you really think there's a scenario where Bruce Pearl and John Calipari and Nate Oates and Todd Golden and Sean Miller are sitting around talking to each other in Destin at the spring meetings, and they're like, yeah, I was involved with that one transfer, but I only had $750,000 to give, and Marquette had $2 million, and can't break the rules, so I guess wish him luck in Milwaukee. You really think this is happening?
No.
Do you know what they're going to do? First, they'll try to get the rules changed or ignored, which is exactly what Governor Lee is trying to do in the state of Tennessee. Create your rules and we'll create a law.
We're going to keep doing the way we're doing it, yeah.
Right. First off, it'll just get into a legal... First off, the lawyers are going to make millions and millions of dollars, and we'll let judges decide all this stuff, but we'll be back in courtrooms over and over again. But if they can't actually change the rules or create laws to void the rules or trump the rules, do you know what they'll do? I'll give you a hint, it's the thing they were doing for decades until they were allowed to just throw money around legally however they wanted. Do you know what they're going to do? Cheat.
Mm-hmm. Under the table deals.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. We are headed right back where we were. This settlement will be approved soon, go into place July 1st, and just like that, we are back to lawsuits and cheating. Lawsuits and cheating. Somebody like PJ Haggerty is going to sign an NIL deal because some schools are going to try to push it. Some obviously illegitimate NIL deal. The ones that are being signed all over the country right now. Once this goes into place, some schools are going to try to push it one through. And Deloitte's going to come in and say, no, that's not legitimate. You're not giving some power forward nobody in America's ever heard of $1.5 million in NIL. That's not legitimate. No starter for the Memphis Grizzlies would get that, or at least some starters for the Memphis Grizzlies would get that type of deal. You're not going to give it to a power forward nobody's ever heard of. It's not a legitimate NIL deal. And you know what's going to happen? Lawsuit. Who are you to tell me how much money I can take from somebody trying to give it to me? Because maybe Bank of Bartlett wouldn't give Santi Albama $1.5 million to be on a Bank of Bartlett billboard because they don't think it's worth it. But if they wanted to, they could. So why can't Memphis give that same amount of money, Bank of Bartlett give that same amount of money to Curtis Givens if it wants to? Who are you to say that's not allowed? Is that even legal? Because what the courts have ruled over and over again is that the zero amount was illegal. That's why we ended up here, because we kept telling student athletes, you can't take nothing. And finally, enough of them just said, yeah, we can. And then the lawsuits became overwhelming, and then this place said, do whatever you want. So I know you're not a lawyer, neither am I, but I would love a lawyer to weigh on this at some point, and some of them already have, and said, yeah, that's a good question. If zero, because zero's a cap, they say no, that's a number. Zero is a number. You can't take anything. That's a cap. That's illegal. That we've already been through that. Why is $20 million not illegal? It's also a cap. If St. John says we want to spend 40, who are you to say they can't? We'll take it to court. The judges have already told us zero is not allowed. That's a cap. Caps are not okay. Well, then the new number, it's a bigger number. It's a big number. It's still a cap. So you can void this Curtis Givens NIL deal if you want to, because it's not a legitimate NIL deal. But we're going to take you to court. And that'll get caught up forever.
Yep.
And if ultimately the judges, for the first time in a while, side with the entity that is college athletics, well, then we'll just take that money, slide it under the desk, and get it to Curtis Givens the same way we would have done 15 years ago. What are we doing? What are we doing? You're not fixing anything. You're changing things, but creating, I would argue, more problems.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it sounds good in theory because the ultimate goal is to create more parity, but it, like everything you just broke down, it's like it's not going to work that way.
I'm not telling you how it's supposed to go. I'm telling you how it's going to go.
Yep.
I'm telling you what's going to happen. I could lay out the way it's intended to play out, but that's not real life. I'm telling you how it's going to go.
The Gary Parrish Show, live weekdays at 10 a.m.